Okay, so the candidate's perspective in interviews is something we need to start to think about there as well. Now, we've talked about our planning, we've talked about all the things we want to do in our open and closed questions, why we want to get certain information, how we're approaching things, etc. But now what we need to think about is, well, what's happening in the mind of the candidate when they come into the room? And there are a few different things that they're often going to have in mind. And one of the things is that often there's an assumption of no development. No personal development. Okay, so the candidate quite often won't really have, particularly if it's an internal candidate you've had for a while, they may have improved over time, but they don't necessarily realise in what ways they've improved. Or sometimes they don't see the opportunity to develop. Okay, so, their development becomes the thing that sits at the back of their mind. Have they developed? Are they developing? Is there room to develop and grow? And as I say, sometimes they don't even realise what development they may have made, positive or sometimes negative. Okay, so that can always be a bit of a consideration there. Also, one of the other things that to start to think about is that, do they have the full picture? Okay, so they assume, first of all, that you have the full picture and you know everything that's going on. So they're going to make knowledge on your behalf. I'll put that there because that ties together. / your behalf. So what happens is often the candidate thinks they have the full picture of exactly what's going on. Okay, so they think they understand how the business works, they think they understand their part in it, and they often think that you know everything about what's happening as well. That you know all about their resume and you know all about the company they came from. So sometimes there's a bit of a moment where you can find that all of a sudden they're talking about stuff you have no idea where they're going. Okay, so you need to pull them up because they just assume you know. And sometimes they think they know the full picture about how it all operates in their business. Or sometimes they won't. Sometimes you'll actually have the complete opposite. They're concerned they don't have the full picture and they want to know what's going on. So they'll start to cage or constrain their answers. And what that does is that starts to lead to a few points where you're not going to get all the information that you were really trying to get in the interview. The other thing is that candidates will describe stuff out of sequence. Okay, when I say describe out of sequence, to them the sequence might make perfect sense. Okay, you've asked them a bunch of questions, they come up with their own logic about how it needs to be answered, and they answer the questions in the sequence that makes sense to them. But that sometimes won't be the way your tick sheet runs. Okay, so the problem is that sometimes you're finding yourself bouncing up and down a sheet trying to track answers because they've answered, the way their career unfolded, but that doesn't necessarily marry up with what you're trying to get at the time. So just be aware that that's what's going to happen. They're going to answer things in the way they need to answer them, in the way that makes sense to them. So stay flexible and don't assume that it's always going to fit in with your nicely, organised, but I need this answer, then this answer, then this answer. They're going to come all over the place, so be prepared. All right, the other thing is that sometimes they're going to start covering up own failings. Okay, so just to be aware that, it's like, they don't always want to talk about the weak parts, or they're going to have concerns about own failings. A lot of the time they don't really feel confident. They're not going to say, yeah, I made mistakes. Let me tell you all about the mistake I made at my last job. Okay, quite often they'll try and cover that up because they don't see the mistake as a learning point. They see the mistake as an embarrassment or a failure. Okay, they got something wrong. I've made heaps of mistakes in my career. I loved all of them, maybe not so much at the time, but later on when I got to reflect back on it, I went, okay, well look, there was something positive I got out of that, save me making the same mistake twice. Okay, so, if everything always worked well, you never learn how to deal with an emergency situation, okay? Things have to go wrong for you to start to work out how to fix them. All right, the other thing is that you don't want to be scouting for other candidates. So when you finish the interview, okay, don't use that person to go get someone else out of the interview waiting room. Oh, can you send me the next guy? Thanks, anything like that. Probably not so great. It creates a feeling that they weren't really special. They were just the next one on the list, okay? So when you take candidates, make sure that you come and receive the candidate, bring them into the place. When you're done with them, you escort them out, you take them to the lift, you thank them very much for your time. You don't just go, oh, can you go back out into the lounge room and send the next guy? Because then they just feel like I was the next guy, not a candidate in my own right, okay? So it can really ruin a relationship right from the beginning. Okay, the other thing is that the whole interview thing can be overwhelming. Okay, a lot of people, they don't like interviews. It feels like a test. It feels like they've done something wrong. It's an interrogation. There's a lot of nerves brought into it. They've lost sleep the night before. They're agitated. They're tired. They've run across town to some office they don't know. They're running 5 minutes late or they're running 5 minutes early. They've turned up at the interview. It's a 40-degree day in Sydney in summer, and you've got them in a suit and tie. They're sweating. Okay, they're covered in sweat. They're about to walk into an interview, and all they can think about is, I must look like I got dragged through a river or something. Okay, all of a sudden the nerves start to fray. And what answers do you think you're really going to get in that circumstance? All right, so it's very easy for them to get overwhelmed, start to panic, get nervous. Okay, it's not a very conducive environment sometimes. Think about how you want to set that up to try and bring some of the emotion down, give them some time to get their stuff together, etc. The other thing is they can be very protective, particularly over their history. Sometimes they might feel there's bits in their resume that, maybe not so sexy, particularly if people have taken time off for childminding or a whole range of other things they might have done. And look, those are all perfectly valid things. People do them, okay? That's the truth. People take time out, look after kids, who would have thought? But to them, sometimes, there can be some baggage with that people have told them that's wrong, or you need to have an answer for it, or you didn't do very well in school. But yeah, man, school was 10 years ago. Why are we still talking about it? But for them, it can be very sensitive, and they start to get protective. The next one is exaggeration is a real problem. Okay, people make stuff up all the time, and they just start to exaggerate. The story was, they had an okay job. But instead of just dealing with an okay job, they want to say they were the grand manager of something huge, or they exaggerate. I was the #1 sales guy that made all this, or we made millions of dollars of profit. Well, hang on, did you make it, or were you just part of a team that did? Okay, so sometimes they can exaggerate their role in it, which can be a bit of a thing about over-importance. Okay, so they can try and big up their job and make it look like it was more than they want, because not everyone's happy to say, yeah, man, I was a player on the team. No, I had to be the captain. I had to be the big person on the team. Sometimes just being a team member is fine, okay? But sometimes they feel the need to impress you, and that's what it is, because they don't know what the candidate before said. They don't know how big an impression they need to make and how good they need to look. So they panic and they start to try and make it look better and better and better, so they become the obvious choice, rather than just tell you what you need to know. Okay? So they tell you what they think you want to hear. They tell you the story they think that you want. Okay? They're in their head, they've already got a thing that they think you want to hear. It's a sales job, so you'll want to hear all about what a great salesperson they were and how they led it. Look, that's the problem, okay? So they're already coming in with a whole lot of preconceptions. They've already started to think about it. They've been on Google, they looked up the top 20 interview questions, and here's the top 20 interview answers. And then you get into this really weird artificial relationship where the questions really aren't worthwhile. All of these things come in, they're overwhelmed, they're already emotional, they're trying to cover up deficiencies, they're exaggerating their strengths, the overimportance of the job blows out, they're telling you what they think you want to hear, and they're entirely protective, okay? So what this means is there's a whole lot of things there that can start to create problems for your interview and start to water down the effectiveness of it. So when you're thinking about designing your questions, when you're thinking about asking your questions and the way you ask them, bear those things in mind and try and bring the situation down a little bit so you can just have an honest conversation with the person, find out what's going on, and then make the most appropriate selection. Okay, don't be the interviewer that plays the game and sort of builds this up. Try and be the person that brings it down and really just gets to the bottom of what you want to know, which is this person the most suitable person I can find for that job? All right, and that's what we're really trying to do. Bring the situation down, think about all these things, and go from there. Cool.